Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Real Life. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. So, this is my custom Magic set, Defense of Veldmar. It's the second set of the Veldmar block. You can go back and check out Wastes of Veldmar on my channel if you want, or you could start at the introduction video for Defense of Veldmar, where I talk about the factions, do a rules primer. I've been through white, blue, and black. Now we're going to red. We're just going to dive right in. So this is Aberrant Giant. This is a red and 5 colorless. It's a 5/4 giant horror. It's common. It's got trample. And when it enters the battlefield, breach. So breach means you shuffle the library, banish one, which is exiling the top card. If it's a land, you put it on the battlefield. If it's a spell, cast it without paying its mana cost, which is not a May ability. You must cast the spell. So this is a very swingy effect, but Breach is kind of like a version of Cascade or Discover. It's less of a combo piece, though, because it's always essentially random. You're always going to shuffle the library and get the top card. If it's a land, so be it. Now that does mean it's card advantage, right? You're getting more cards in by breaching. And sometimes you're going to chain one breach spell into another breach spell. So this can be an extremely powerful, again, swingy kind of mechanic available in Limited. Could get there in Constructed. We're doing limited ratings on the set for the most part. So in Constructed, you might play this if you just want like a critical mass of things that all say breach on them in the deck to have the greatest chance of chaining one into another. In Limited, a 5/4 Trampler for 6 that nets you a card and might give you a mana advantage is probably pretty good. It's probably very worthwhile. This card is secretly much better for a couple of factions. Playing it with the other breach cards makes it explosive, so it's good to play it in the 4-color Far Realm faction. That's blue, black, red, green, everything but white. And there's also a 3-color faction called the Ulthrak, and that's black, red, green, and they care about creatures that have a mana cost of 6 or greater, and this qualifies. If you're in one of those factions, this is exactly the kind of stuff you want to be doing, and it probably rates right up around a 3.5 for them. And for everyone else, it's still not bad, and I'd say it's around a 3. You know, if this was a faster format that was more aggressive, you might not have time to get around to a play like this, but I think this is a slower format, and a 3 is a pretty good rating for this. Artificer's Knack. So this is meant to be flavored as a Roka Guild card. They are white, red, green. They care about artifacts. They have the Artifacts Matter theme. And some of their cards in red, they've got sort of a charm type of effect where you have multiple modes on the card. And this is one of those. So we have a 1 red sorcery. It's a common. You choose one. You can destroy target artifact, which is a pretty good deal. If you have a good target hit on the other side, and there are a lot of targets, a lot of artifacts running around the set. You can also create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. For most people, that would be lackluster, but for the Roka Guild, you want a high count of artifacts. So that could be actually a reasonable play for that. You can also banish one, exile the top card of your library, and you return an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can blow up an artifact, make an artifact, or raise dead an artifact from your graveyard. It's a super flexible spell. None of the modes might quite merit inclusion into your deck on their own, but because it's so flexible, this card's going to be pretty good. It will be especially good in the deck that cares about artifacts. So For the Roka, I would say this card's handily a 2.5. It's going to make the cut into your deck pretty often. For other people, let's call it a 2. You know, it's nice and flexible, so it might not always make the cut, but you're not going to be embarrassed to have access to all these modes either. Especially if you have a couple of artifacts in your deck you could bring back from the graveyard. Bestial Fury, this is a reprint. The original came out, I don't know, Alliances, sometime back around then, 1994. So this is a red and 2 colorless. It's an enchantment aura. It's an uncommon. It enchants a creature. And when this enters the battlefield, you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So as long as you're careful and you wait until the opponent is tapped out and they can't kill your creature in response, putting this on one of your creatures is going to give you a card back. So that's part of the draw of this spell, is that auras are usually not great, but this one replaces itself, so it's fine. Whenever the enchanted creature becomes blocked, it gets +4/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. So you can take something the opponent wouldn't have minded blocking or couldn't necessarily quite get in combat. You know, maybe you had like a high toughness creature and they've got a high toughness creature. They'll just bounce off each other. Now you put Bestial Fury on your creature and they have to let it through. Otherwise you just trample over. There are a lot of corner cases and situations where I can imagine this basically making your creature unblockable because the opponent does not want to step in front of it anymore. And it draws you a card to replace itself. It's not amazing or anything, but I think it's at least at the level of being a filler card. I think it's not any worse than a 1.5. And all these cards that cantrip like this are kind of good for Quel'Nai College. That's red, blue, green. They have a card draw matters theme, so anything that gets you drawing extra cards, even if it's on the opponent's turn, can trigger some of their cards and give you beneficial effects. So for Quel'Nai, you know, a card like this is maybe a little bit higher, like a 2. Chaos Converter. This is a red and a colorless creature elemental horror. It's an uncommon. It's a 3/1. You can pay a generic mana and get blue, black, red, or green at random. Activate only once per turn. So since you can only activate it once per turn, you're going to randomly turn one of your mana into one of these 4. That makes it pretty bad. Very unreliable as a way to convert mana. So why would I do that? Why would I make a card like that? There's a theme of randomness matters to where coin flips and things that say random in their rules text will trigger other cards for the Far Realm. So this happens to be a very cheap and easy way for you to trigger an ability that's got random in its rules text. So if you're doing it as an enabler for that strategy, it's really good at doing that. On top of that, a 3/1 for 2 would be somewhere around the range of a 1.5 to a 2 on its own. You need 2 drops. It's got high power. It can trade well in combat. And then it might fix your mana. And if you're doing the random or coin flip triggers, this is a great enabler for that strategy. So if you're in that Far Realm strategy with the payoffs, this is a great card for turning on those payoffs, and it might rate as highly as a 3 if you've got a, critical threshold of that stuff. And for everyone else, like I said, this is probably around like a 1.5 or a 2. Occasionally, it will filter mana into the right color. The worst that can happen is you take a mana that was the wrong color and turn it into another mana that's the wrong color. You might as well try. Chaos Egg. This is a mythic rare. It costs 1 red. It's creature egg horror. It's a 0/4. It has defender. Means it can't attack. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a hatchling counter on Chaos Egg. When there are 4 or more hatchling counters on Chaos Egg, sacrifice it and breach. So, normally breach effects start at around 4 mana. This one, you have to wait. But the cost up front is only 1 red, and you've got a blocker in the meantime. So, if it ticks all the way up to 4 hatchling counters, you get to sacrifice it in breach, and then you'll either get another land or you'll get a free spell. On top of that, when Chaos Egg dies, you get a 3/1 black horror creature token. So you could get like a free spell and a 3/1 token. That's great. Or a land and a 3/1 token. And if this dies in combat, like you block with it and the opponent uses a pump spell, and the egg ends up dying before it gets to those counters, you don't get the breach effect, but it still replaces itself with a 3/1. Which is a good deal for 1 red. So, the card looks a little weird, but it's actually pretty good. It's good at paying you back for your initial investment of just 1 mana. So, this could have constructed applications in limited. In limited, I'd say this is really strong. The opponent does not want to have to point a kill spell at this thing, but if they don't, you're going to get a breach off of it as well. So, kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And it's better if you can play the spell early. If red is just a splash color in your deck, you don't find your red mana until like turn 5 or 6 or something. Clearly, this doesn't have as much impact at that stage of the game. You really want to be able to play it on like turn 1 or 2. Still, I think I would rate this around a 4. I think this is a strong draw to pull you into red. There are some decks, some situations who won't want it, can't make good use of it, but still, I'm going to give it a 4. Conflicted Invaders. This is a red and 3 colorless. It is a mythic rare sorcery. The art turned out kind of funny on this one, and I decided to go ahead and use it. Flip a coin 3 times. For each flip you win, create a 3/1 black horror creature token. For each flip you lose, create a Quintessence token. Which, again, is a colorless enchantment token named Quintessence. It has sacrifice the enchantment to add colorless mana. And it also has pay 2 generic, sacrifice the enchantment, draw a card. So this is either getting you up to 9 power of creatures, right, if you get 3 3/1s. Or you could be getting 3 Quintessence tokens, which you could sack for 3 mana, or gradually pay mana and sacrifice to draw 3 cards. More likely you end up with a combination of the two. Some number of creatures, some number of Quintessence. I feel like the mana cost on this card is at a pretty fair rate. If you could guarantee you were going to get 3 of one or 3 of the other, it's possible this would be a little bit too strong. But getting a mix of the two, I think 4 mana is probably fair. In limited, this thing's a beating. Whether you're getting like a ton of power onto the board or whether you're getting a ton of mana and cards, either way, this is pretty backbreaking in limited. This is a lot of value. And there are a lot of factions who could make good use of this card as well. So, like Quelnai loves to draw extra cards. They could use the Quintessence to do that. The Far Realm gets a coin flipping card that can trigger other cards of theirs. So, yeah, there's a lot going on here. Can serve a lot of different ways. And I would say this card is handily a 4. This is also more splashable than the Chaos Egg, because even if you get this late in the game, it's still going to have a pretty immediate impact. So, yeah, I think this is pretty strong. Consortium Firestorm. This is 2 red and 5 colorless. We have a rare sorcery. You can see the Archmage Veladra Orusaniel in the art here. This is after she's gotten her memories back. Consortium Firestorm deals 7 damage to each of up to any 3 targets. So you can target players, battles, creatures, planeswalkers, anything. So you can't deal 7 damage to the same target more than once, but you can hit up to 3 things for 7. This is pretty good. You can burn out the opponent. You can get some pretty serious card advantage with this in red. There haven't been a lot of good spells for the last several sets or years in Magic for a big red deck. There's been like a little bit of support, but not enough to actually get it off the ground. And I would like to see, big red be an archetype where you want to cast things that cost 5, 6, 7 mana in your red deck. And go over the top with these giant effects. So this is a spell in that vein. In Limited, this is a slower format. I think you can get to 7 mana. And if you can get to 7 mana, then playing this is worth the trouble. It's a little bit harder to splash with the double red in the cost, but not that hard. If you have a decent amount of mana fixing, you can get there. And all that being said, I think this spell is probably worthy of... Gosh, let me think here. I mean, this could be the play that wins the game, right? You burn out 2 of their blockers, hit their face for 7, attack with everything. This might be a 4.5. I know I haven't rated anything that high so far in my set review, but I think this is an absurd bomb in Limited. There'll be a few situations where they have a creature with more than 7 toughness, but then that means that you can probably line it up to where either before or after combat, they block one of your smaller creatures with their giant creature, then you burn it out, and at that point you're like getting 2 for 1 a little bit, but you're still taking out things on the other side of the board that you had trouble dealing with otherwise. Yeah, I think this is like a 4.5. Consortium Mana Sparker. This is a red and 3 colorless. It is a 2/4 dwarf wizard at uncommon. He's got reach. It's because he can blast his magic up at the sky to intercept flying creatures. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you banish 1, so you exile the top card of your library, and then you add white, blue, black, or red. Anything but green. It's a consortium card. So this one's not at random. This one you pick. So this is accelerating your mana. And it's fixing your mana. And it's not an embarrassing body on the battlefield either to be a good blocker. And the Consortium likes to get to a late game where they're playing gigantic non-creature kind of spells. So this is feeding into that strategy by helping you stall the board with a high toughness creature and ramp your mana so you can get into your late game spells. It's not the only color combination that might want this. The Ulthrak that are black, red, green, they've got a theme of creatures with mana cost 6 or greater matters. They would also like the bump in mana that this gives you. And the mana fixing could be handy for a couple of different factions. So I think this is going to be a pretty useful card all the way around. I would probably rate it as highly as a 3. Consortium Sculptor. This is red and 2 colorless. I promise we're through the Consortium names after this. So we have a 2/2 Dwarf Artificer for 3 at common. When it enters the battlefield, you banish 1, then create a treasure token and a 0/1 colorless wall artifact creature token with Defender. And even though this says Consortium on the card, I would consider this more so of a Roka Guild card, because it puts out 2 artifacts and they have an Artifacts Matter theme. The way that this benefits you for the Consortium is the treasure is helping to ramp and fix your mana, and the wall is giving you a blocker to help stall the game. And a lot of different groups might like to have something that makes treasure. This is a 3 and 4 color set. So, this little guy's pretty good. I'd say how highly you rate him depends on how much you need the artifacts or the mana fixing. So, if you're Roka, you might call this guy like a 3 because he's putting out 2 artifacts. Everyone else probably should at least give him like a 2.5. Flare, this is a reprint from the days of yore. Red and 2 colorless, instant, common. Flare deals 1 damage to any target. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So, creatures have been getting bigger in Magic, and that might lead you to think that this spell has been outsized, and it's not going to be very good in this limited format. But I have news for you. First of all, there are quite a few token creatures in the format, and some of them are 3/1 black horrors. Killing a 3/1 token and drawing a card to replace this is pretty good. Furthermore, there's actually some big creatures in the set that have 1 toughness. In blue, there was a Sphinx of 5 choices we looked at that had 1 toughness. In black, there was a giant breach creature. That was a 6/1 lifelinker that breaches when it enters the battlefield. Both of those cards, you're going to look pretty smart if you hit them with a flare and draw a card. I'm saying there are live targets for flare in this set, and the card is better than it looks. You can also use it to, tweak combat a point in your favor to where your creature gets blocked by something. It doesn't quite kill the opponent's creature by 1 point. You flare it dead. The flare didn't cost you a card. That's pretty good. This card has more play to it than one would think. Some of the other reprints like this I've rated a 1.5. Flare is a little higher, I think. I think Flare is at least a 2. And I would need a little bit more experience with the limited environment to say for sure, but I think it's between a 2 and a 2.5. I think it will surprise you how often Flare is useful. Flux Elemental. This is a red and 5 colorless. We have an Elemental. It's a 6/6, uncommon. It has haste and reach. And at the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you win the flip, put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Flux Elemental. If you lose the flip, put 2 -1/-1 counters on Flux Elemental. And just to remind everyone, +1 counters and -1 counters are like matter and antimatter. They just cancel out. They cannot both exist on the same card at the same time. So Flux Elemental changes in size as the game goes on. It can get bigger or smaller. But the turn you play it, you've either got a 6/6 reach blocker, which is significant, or you have a 6/6 haste attacker, which is also very significant. It's good on offense and defense, and it can trigger, Ulthrak stuff because it's a creature that costs 6. It can trigger Far Realm stuff because of the coin flips. So, if you're going big in the format, and you probably want to, this is a really solid creature despite the fact that you can't depend on whether it's going to get bigger or smaller. It has enough impact the turn you play it that I think it's going to be worth it. So, I'm going to call this card a 3. No, a 3.5. I think it's actually better than a 3. Giant Sniper. It's a red and 4 colorless. It is a 5/5 giant archer. It's common. and she's got Menace and Reach. So, again, we're looking at a creature that's good on offense and defense. Interesting mix of keywords. Doesn't trigger quite as many different synergies within the set. So this is more of a generically useful large creature that doesn't have as many synergies and payoffs. I think this card's right around a 2. It's better than just a filler card, but it's not as good as a card that's synergizing well with your deck. Giant Wizard. This is a red and 4 colorless 1/5 Giant Wizard. It's an uncommon, has trample. Giant Wizard gets +2/+0 for each card you've drawn this turn. This is for Quel'Nai College. Red, blue, green. So, if you're just a typical deck, where you don't have a lot of extra card draw abilities, you can rely on this to be a 3/5 trampler on your turn, but that's an extremely forgettable stat line for 5 mana. On the opponent's turn, it would just be a blocker, and not even that exciting of a blocker for its mana cost. But if you're in Quel'Nai College, they've got the whole theme of card draw matters, and so this is one of their payoff cards. If you can engineer a situation where you're going to draw an extra 4 cards on your turn, which is not crazy, you could play something on the opponent's turn that draws you 2 cards on the next turn's upkeep, then you can do something on your turn to draw an extra card. You know, if you draw an extra 3 cards to where it's 4 cards total on your turn, this card is suddenly a 9/5 trampler. So, in the right deck, this card could be amazing. This could be the thing that helps close out the game for you, the opponent must deal with. And for everyone else, it's pretty forgettable. So, if you're in Quel'Nai, I think this card is right around a 3.5. This is one of the payoff cards that helps close out the game. And if you're not in Quel'Nai, then this card's like a 1.5. It's filler. Yeah, it's kind of playable, but it's definitely filler if you're not Quel'Nai. Goblin Club Drubber. This is 1 red. This is a 1/2 Goblin Warrior at common. That's it. The rest is flavor text. So this is a vanilla creature. I've got a cycle of vanilla creatures, 1 per color. They're all at different mana costs and power toughnesses. As a little side note, I'm making all of them vanilla creatures that have never been printed at that specific power and toughness for that mana cost before. So they're all new vanilla creatures, believe it or not. This is pretty forgettable. There are some sets where they have a more aggressive slant and you need to get on the board early. This isn't one of those sets. I think aggro is going to have a really hard time in Wastes of Veldmar and Defense of Veldmar. And so a card like this one, you know, because it has 2 toughness, it can like stave off the 1/1 colorless nightmares and the 1/1 constructs and stuff like that. It can hold the ground for you a little bit, but it's really not worth the investment of a card slot in your deck for it. You would much rather have something that's synergizing with the deck, that has more power and toughness for more mana. This is not the way to go in this set. Now, you might find some sort of hidden sideways draft archetype of aggro to go after. If you manage to pull that off, kudos. But I think this card is actually worse than it looks. And it already doesn't look very good. I'm going to rate this card a 0.5. That means it's a sideboard card. There there could be some crazy situation. I could imagine you needing to sideboard in earlier drops to help stave off a flood of 1/1 tokens or something in the early game. But other than sideboarding, I don't think you should main deck this card. Golbrand's Hammer. So Golbrand's one of the archmages of the consortium. Red and 4 colorless, we've got a sorcery at an uncommon. It has 3 modes, so you choose one. Golbrand's Hammer deals 6 damage to target creature. Alright, that's fair. Not exciting, but gets rid of some big rares and giant threats and such. Destroy target artifact. That's not really worth it for 5 mana, except you get it as a mode on the card that's most of the time going to be killing a creature. If they happen to have an artifact that is really troubling you, then you'll be happy to get rid of it, even if it's for 5 mana. And you can also make a target opponent sacrifice a non-token permanent and a token permanent. It doesn't say non-land, so they're non-token permanent. They could sacrifice a land. And the token permanent obviously has to be a token. If they don't have any tokens, that part doesn't do anything. So this last mode, you probably don't use as often. It's more niche. But if you feel like land destruction is the way to go, or you feel like you've backed them into a corner where you're going to get some value off of this last mode, then it's an option. Most of the time this is going to be killing a creature. Occasionally it's going to be killing an artifact. It's flexible but unexciting because of the sorcery speed. It is playable, but not exciting in any way. I'm going to rate this 2. We'll go with a 2. Junk Squatters. We've got a red and a colorless 1/3 common creature orc citizen. When Junk Squatters enters the battlefield, you banish 1, then create 2 trash tokens. So this card is great for the Roka Guild. They care about having a high count of artifacts. So even though trash tokens are, kind of a minor effect on the game, you can pay 1 and sack them to mill 1 and then surveil 1. Which is good for a graveyard deck. It can also give you a bit of card filtering with the surveils. But it's especially good for Roka because they want as many artifacts as possible. Now, normally you're not going to have red in your Zarnik deck, which is white, blue, green. But if you happen to mix Roka and Zarnik together, then Zarnik is definitely going to appreciate the extra trash token production this card makes. We got a competent blocker. We've got some extra utility from the trash. It's an interesting card. It's mostly for Roka Guild. It's kind of a build around, come up with the purpose for it on your own sort of thing for anyone else. One of the things I enjoyed about this card was when I was picking out the flavor text, I decided that they were friendly. That you weren't expecting them to set up here. They're kind of like new to the neighborhood, unofficial settlers, but they're inviting you to dinner. Are you going to refuse? Lucky Hall. This is a red and a colorless. It is a sorcery, uncommon. You create a trash token and a treasure token. You may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Banish 1. Again, this is great for Roka because of the artifact production, but I would say this card is good for anyone in this format because it's smoothing out your draws and it's giving you a treasure token which can ramp and fix your mana at the same time, and this is a 3 and 4 color format. So because of how useful this is, and specifically it's at the 2 mana mark right when you need to be hitting your land drops, and figuring out your path forward in the game. I think this is a great card. It's going to find its way into your decks most of the time. So for that reason, I'm going to call it a 3. There's like a limit on how many you want to run, but the first couple of them are just going to smooth out the game for you so much. Mad Researcher. This is red and a colorless, 1/4 Dwarf Wizard at uncommon. Tap, discard a card at random. Draw a card. Pay 2, sacrifice Mad Researcher. Return target card in your graveyard to your hand if it was put there this turn. So, this card is simultaneously for Quel'Nai College because it can do a looting effect for you. Even though the discard is random, it'll trigger a draw card effect, which is what Quel'Nai College wants. So even though random discards aren't great, this can be turning on all of your payoff cards, and that might be good enough. Also, it's a great blocker in the early game. It's a 1/4 for 2 mana. And if you ended up discarding something you didn't really want to lose, or you just like trade in combat or whatnot, you can sacrifice this guy and pull something back from your graveyard as long as it went there the same turn that you activate him. And this, to me, kind of played into the immediacy of red. Red normally is kind of like a you got to use it or lose it kind of mentality. But I think that works here because they can only save something that was going to the graveyard the same turn. So it's got that immediacy about it of like, you can only play it until the end of the turn or until the end of the next turn. That kind of a impulse draw thing that red does. This is like that, but for the graveyard. It's like, well, it went to the graveyard. I gotta sack him now or it's gone forever. So I feel like this works within red's part of the color pie because of that immediacy. Also, the random discards can work for the Far Realm. That can trigger their payoff cards. They care about coin flips and random being in the rules text. So, can hit a couple of good spots for different factions in the game. If you're one of those factions, I would say this card's pretty great. At least worthy of a 2.5. If you're not in those factions, we'll bump them down to a 2. I still think there's enough incidental advantage you can get, even if you have to wait until you only have one card in your hand, so you know the card that you're discarding when you use them. Even then, I still think a 1/4 blocker plus the ability to get something from your graveyard, all of that I think is still worthy of being more than just plain filler. Midnight Brainstorm. So this is a red and a colorless, an instant at common. You discard a non-land card. If you do, Midnight Brainstorm deals 2 damage to any target and you draw 2 cards. So this is like a mini Hypothesizzle that's just in red. Now Hypothesizzle had blue, so you were able to draw the cards first before choosing what to discard. But red does a rummage type effect, so red makes you do the discard first. That being said, this spell is more efficient. This is 2 damage to any target for 2 mana. Hypothesizzle was 4 damage to more limited targets for 5 mana. I think this card is going to be really good. I think it's going to have great play to it. And if you're discarding non-land cards to trigger this and get burn out of it, at least you feel like it paid you back a little bit for discarding a non-land. And if you're hitting your land drops, then you're going to make it to your big in-game spells. So this is taking you where you need to go in this format. So I think this card's probably a 3. Between the card filtering and tacked onto a removal spell, I think it's going to be pretty good. Mirror to Infinity. This is a red and 2 colorless. It's a rare enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if you have drawn 2 or more cards this turn, create a 2/2 colorless reflection creature token. This is Quel'Nai College. Right, so they care about how card draw matters, so you can trigger this on your turn and on the opponent's turn if you can draw 2 cards during the opponent's turn. It also has the ability sacrifice 10 reflections. Search your library for 2 non-land cards, then cast those spells without paying their mana costs. Shuffle your library. That's probably not going to trigger in limited. That's probably going to be more of a goal for a constructed thing to try to pull off. If you ever do pull that off, you're probably just going to win the game. There are so many big spells in the Veldmar format that being able to go hunt 2 of them up out of your deck for free is such a gigantic swing. You're probably going to win the game. You know, there's spells that can deal like 7 and 8 points of damage to the opponent's face. So they could be very close to just being dead if you can cast 2 spells for free out of your library. But is it worth it for the reflection creature tokens? I think so, especially in limited. It is not hard at all to trigger 2 or more cards drawn on your turn. Right, you can have like a looter or a rummager like the dwarf we looked at. And that could be netting you a 2/2 at the end of each of your turns. And we've seen cards like this before that can produce like a 1/1 every turn. But a 2/2 is, well, frankly, it's twice as good as a 1/1. It's a much more significant impact. So, and you could trigger it twice every turn cycle if you manage to draw 2 cards on the opponent's turn. That's not as easy to pull off, but it's possible. I would say if you see this card in draft, this would be a big pull into red and to Quel'Nai. I would say it's at least a 4. Something that requires some building around, but is well worth it. Monster Calling. This is a red and 2 colorless, uncommon sorcery. You banish cards until you reveal a creature card with mana cost 6 or more, then put that card into your hand. Create a quintessence token. So this is an Ulthrak card. That is black, red, green. They care about creatures with mana cost 6 or greater. And if you're in that deck, you probably have a very weird looking mana curve where some people would be scared of casting a card like this because if they've only got 3 6-drops in their deck and they've already drawn one of them, they'd be worried about exiling 15 cards before they hit one. But if you're in the right deck, you could definitely have something more like 6 or 7 creatures that cost 6 or more. And you're not going to go that deep into the library before you hit one. The Quintessence token can help you get the mana you need in order to cast that card. Or the Quintessence token you could use later to draw a card, in which case this card is just card advantage. You know, I found you a creature, you drew a card off the Quintessence. Either way you go, it's a pretty good setup piece for the deck that wants it. And anyone outside of that deck only really wants this if they're going big and they have a lot of big creatures. So I'd say there aren't as many different factions trying to vie for this card. I think it's more of an Ulthrak card. So if you're in Ulthrak, this card looks pretty great, and I'd say it could easily rate as well as a 2.5 or a 3. And for everyone else, they're going to be more scared of it. It can get you advantages, but at what cost? So, because of that fear of banishing so much of your library, it might be rated more at like a 1.5 for other people. Orc Marauder, this is a red and 2 colorless. We have a 3/3 Orc Berserker. It's a rare. When Orc Marauder enters the battlefield, you choose one. It can gain haste and menace until end of turn, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. So if it survives to the end, then it becomes a 4/4. Or you can create a treasure token and banish one. You exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. So we've got the beatdown option on the first part of the card, where it's more of the aggro beatdown kind of strategy. Comes in with haste and menace, and then grows to a 4/4. Very good chunk of creature for 3 mana. The second mode, we're going more value mid-range. We've ramped and fixed our mana. We've gotten an extra card in the red way, where as long as we're able to cast it before the end of the next turn, we got card advantage. Because this card can swing either direction like that, I think it's going to be great in both limited and constructed. In limited, I would say you might go with the second mode more often. But if you play it a little too early in the game, like if you're Ulthrak, for example, and you know you have a lot of things in your deck that cost like 6 and 7 mana, you might not want to do the second mode on turn 3, because you might exile something and not be able to use it. In which case, you might decide to play him as a beatdown. But if it's just a little bit later in the game, you can play him, get the treasure, see what you hit off the top, and even if it's, a 6 or 7 drop, you should be able to cast it the next turn. So, because this card's well statted and because it's flexible, I think it's pretty great in limited. I don't think it's necessarily like the thing that wins you the game in limited. It's just very, very solid. For that reason, I'm going to give it a 3.5. I could see a case for 4, but I'm gonna go with a 3.5, and that's for just about any red deck in limited. Orcish Wrath. A red and a colorless. Instant, common. Until end of turn, target creature gets +3/+1, and has, when this creature dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. There are a lot of different ways red pump spells can try to get damage through. I haven't seen a whole lot of them where the pump spell itself gives them a death damage trigger. So this is just an interesting little tweak on the usual pump spell. Instead of doing trample, it hurts extra if your creature dies. And because you only pump its toughness by 1, that's a little bit more likely. So, this pump spell is not amazing in limited. I would say it's okay in limited, but I think it's going to be better in constructed, where more often you can engineer a situation where you get the extra damage from the power, and then maybe you also sacrifice the creature and get the 2 damage on the backside of this card. In which case, this card dealt an extra 5 damage for 2 mana if you can use all of it. In limited, I think this is not quite as exciting, and I would rate it more like 1.5. Riftmaker. This is a red and a colorless artifact, rare. When Riftmaker enters the battlefield, banish 1, then create a treasure token. So that's already pretty good. You're ramping and fixing your mana a little bit and putting out 2 artifacts, so Roka Guild likes that. It also has pay a red and 4 colorless and tap and breach. You can even do this at instant speed. So, again, breach is you shuffle the library, exile the top card. If it's a land, goes on the battlefield. If it's a spell, you cast it without paying its mana cost. Not a May effect. Must do it. This card is definitely powerful if you have enough time. It's random, so if you whiffed a couple of times and hit a land off of it, it's possible the opponent could run you over while you're trying to get this thing to crank, you know, trying to get good hits off of it. But in a long game, with enough time, sooner or later you're going to start getting good hits off of it, and it's going to run away with the game. So, it's a little slow, a little clunky, but very powerful once it's online. So, it's difficult to rate it. Roka's going to like it because it puts 2 artifacts out. For Roka, I would say this card's probably a 4. You were going to run it anyway. Getting the breaches is just, you know, amazing. For other people, we'll call it a 3.5. You know, it might be hard to use, but it's inevitable. If you have enough time and mana, then it'll win the game. And the treasure token early is good for anyone. Roka Champion. This is a red and 3 colorless. Creature Human Warrior. It is a star 3 at uncommon. It has trample. Its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. So, this is one of the payoff cards for Roka. And pretty much all the other red factions don't want this guy. Roka definitely wants this card as a way to close out the game once they've built all the synergies and made all the artifacts. They need something to pay it off. But no one else really wants him. So if you're Roka, you might be able to pick up this guy like later on the wheel of the pack, because you have not as many people fighting you for these cards. If you're in Roka, I would say this card's around a 3. Pretty much always makes it in. And if you're not Roka, this is nearly unplayable. I'm going to call it like a 0.5. You know, you could sideboard it in for some reason. Maybe the opponent's got cards that give you a bunch of trash tokens or something, and you might decide that he'd be better in the deck than out. But yeah, it's good for Roka, nigh unplayable elsewhere. Roka Monstrosity. This is a red and 4 colorless. It is a star artifact creature, construct horror at common. It has menace, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts you control. So again, this time it counts as an artifact itself. So it does give itself a point of power and toughness at least. But that would not be good enough unless you're playing into the strategy. So this is another card that Roka wants and other people do not. So you probably don't have to fight people too hard for this one, but it is a really nice payoff. And it's nice that it is an artifact in addition. So this is probably right around a 3 for Roka. And again, right around a 0.5 for everyone else. It only comes out of the sideboard if there's some unique reason. Maybe I should even rate this one on the card before it has a 0, if you're not Roka. Roka Tool Blast. This is another of the modal cards in red that I mentioned earlier. So this is 1 red, instant, it's an uncommon. You choose one. Roka Tool Blast deals 3 damage to target battle or token creature. There are battles in this set. They're multicolored. There's also one colorless one. But they're all aligned with the factions. But there are battles, and so that text does matter on this. You can also just burn out a token. That's fine. Target artifact gains indestructible until end of turn. Obviously, if you're in Roka, then that's pretty good. You could turn one of your big golems indestructible, and that's a lot more relevant to turn an artifact creature indestructible, whereas it's very niche to turn like a non-creature artifact indestructible. Or target creature gets +1/+0 and trample until end of turn. That's not a great combat trick, but it's just another mode on the card. So you have access to it. Once in a while, it might be the thing that you need to trample over to win the game or win a combat. And the last mode is you can draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. That's not good. You're just cycling it to draw a card, and you're doing so slowly. But that gives this card a little extra functionality if you're in Quel'Nai. Then you can take this as a card draw enabler for Quel'Nai College, and you have access to the other modes as well. So that's a reason that someone outside of Roka might decide to take the card. Since it's got these 4 different modes on it, if you're in Roka, I would say this card is pretty good and will make your deck the majority of the time. So, probably pushing on 2.5. If you're Quel'Nai, we'll give it a 2.0, since you can trigger the card draw off of it, and you get all the other modes. And for everyone else, we'll call it a 1.5 just because it's flexible. So even if you have no special synergy for it in your deck, the modes might come up. They might matter. Sparkling Cinders. This is red and 2 colorless, common sorcery. Sparkling Cinders deals 4 damage to target battle, creature, or planeswalker. Banish 1, then create a Quintessence token. This is strong. This is really, really good. Obviously, it would be better if it was an instant, but making a Quintessence token means it can ramp you on mana or it can draw a card. Having that attached to an efficient burn spell that deals 4 damage is really strong. So, almost no matter what red deck you are, I would say this card is a 3. It's an amazing piece of removal. Netting a Quintessence token is just very helpful. So, yeah, I don't know what more to say about it. It's either a 3 or a 3.5. Tap the Capacitors. This is a red and 2 colorless. We have a sorcery, a rare. Until end of turn, artifacts you control have tap, add red. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So this card replaces itself with a card, and otherwise it is a red fast mana card, in the vein of like Seething Song and Dark Ritual from way back in the day in black. So this is only netting you mana if you have a bunch of artifacts. And you have to be in red, which pretty much means you need to be in Roka. Now, that being said, this could, with the right setup, it could give you a burst of mana and replace itself with a card. And that could be very strong. Now, once you're tapping your 0/1 walls and your trash tokens, and even your treasure tokens, right? You can tap the treasure tokens without sacrificing them when you've used this to make mana. It could give you a big burst and not leave you down a card in the process. So if you're in Roka and you have giant artifact creatures and other things to be ramping into, in that situation, I think this card's pretty good. Like a 2.5. And for everyone else, it's nearly unplayable. It depends on how many artifacts you have. At least it replaces itself with a card draw. But if you don't have the right setup for it, I can't call it more than like a 0.5. Maybe Quell Knight College would play it if they just really wanted another way to draw a card, but they should have enough ways to do that. Thune Terra Sculpting. This is a red and 3 colorless. Uncommon sorcery. Destroy target land, create a quintessence token. Just straight up. Land destruction, the theory back in the day was that land destruction was not very good in limited. Was more of a constructed thing. That was, this is advice from a long time ago because land destruction's become very uncommon for years now. So how it performs in a modern day environment that's like a 3 or 4 color mana environment, it's a little hard to say. Maybe you blow up one of their lands that's producing like 2 or 3 colors of mana, and now they're screwed. Maybe it's more powerful now than it used to be, but back in the day, the thought was that land destruction wasn't consistent enough in limited to matter. Most people would be running like 17 lands, so they have a pretty high land count. They're pretty good at hitting their land drops. Because the decks are not quite as tuned as constructed decks are, that the chance you're going to throw them off curve is not as great. There were just a lot of reasons why it was believed that land destruction wasn't that good for limited environments a long time ago. As for whether it is now, you have to experiment. And this spell can net you a mana from the quintessence token or a card. So the quintessence token adds an extra wrinkle here. How do you rate a card like this? It's tough. With the quintessence token in there, it's extra tough. I'm going to call this a 2 because I think you could trip up some people's mana bases in this 3-4 color environment. And the quintessence token's pretty valuable. So I'm going to call this a 2. Good old Thundering Rebuke. This is a reprint. So this is a red and a colorless sorcery. It's an uncommon. Thundering Rebuke deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker. That's it. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's still an efficient ratio of mana to damage. It still does what you need it to do for the most part. Kill spells have gotten all kinds of extra text and nuance as the game has progressed. This effect has sometimes become instant speed, or it makes you a token, or you can draw and discard. There's all kinds of stuff. But I thought it would be nice to go back to basics here. There's plenty of complexity to go around in this set. And once in a while, it's nice to ratchet it back and just remember some of the basic effects of the game. This is still certainly good enough to play in limited. I would rate this probably a 3. It's a really good, solid chunk of removal. It basically always makes the deck. But it's also very simple and easy to parse when you're looking at the draft and you're trying to read all the cards. Tome Retriever. Red and 2 colorless. We have a 3/2 human wizard at common. There's Bulwark X, where X is equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. And Bulwark X means whenever this creature attacks, it gets +0/+X until end of turn. So bumps up his toughness while attacking. This is a Quell Knight card. Now, anyone can use it, right? It's a 3/2 for 3, and anyone who's attacking on their turn has drawn a card for the turn, which means he attacks as a 3/3. And that's fine. That is perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with it. But if you're in Quell Knight, and you've drawn a couple extra cards, once this guy's attacking as like a 3/4 or a 3/5 that you paid 3 mana for, that is a very competent attacker for the mana cost. And if you wanted to take a more aggressive slant with your Quell Knight deck, this would be an interesting start. to doing so. So this is like a little common payoff card for Quel'Nai College, but it's playable. It's reasonable for anyone in red, basically. So if you're Quel'Nai, I think this is right around a 3. I think it basically always makes your deck. And if you're not Quel'Nai, it's still not bad. Blocks as a 3-2, attacks as a 3-3. I think that's at least worthy of being like a 2. Ulthrak Dragon. This is a red and 5 colorless. We have a 4-5 dragon. It's an uncommon. It has flying. Whenever you cast a creature spell with mana cost 6 or more, Ulthrak Dragon deals 4 damage to any target. And yeah, that's a powerful line of text. So this is one of your payoff cards in Ulthrak. Not only did you invest 6 mana for a 4-5 flyer, which is pretty good. You know, it's a hefty chunk of a blocker, holds off things in the sky, decent way to close out the game. But on top of that, if you're playing into what Ulthrak's trying to do, the next turn you play another giant creature, you deal 4 damage to any target, you know, burn out their flying blocker, burn their face, flip a battle. That's really good. So, the opponent can't really let you keep triggering this thing once you get to your, 6 drops, or you're going to run away with the game. This is an amazing card if you're Ulthrak. And it's not bad for other people. This is kind of a go big format. So other people might not be able to trigger the card quite as much, but they might be able to trigger it some. So if you're in Ulthrak, I think this is like easily a 3.5. Could maybe be higher than that. I don't know if I'm willing to rate an uncommon out of 4. Well, let's go with a 3.5. This is really good. Ulthrak Zealot. This is a red and a colorless. We have a 2-2 Orc Berserker. It's common. She has haste. And that would be playable right there. 2 2s for 2 with haste. See play in red aggressive decks in Constructed all the time. So depending on what's available in the format, it could slot, right into a red aggro deck. But the text on the card doesn't end there. Whenever you cast a creature spell with mana cost 6 or more, Ulthrak Zealot gets +4/+0 and first strike until end of turn. So this is an interesting slant to an Ulthrak deck. A way that you can be aggressive early, but if you get your 2-drop late, you might still be able to trigger it with one of your other giant creatures on a future turn, and it comes in swinging as a 6/2 first striker, probably killing whatever's in front of it. It might just get chump blocked, but that's still a really good battlefield impact for a 2-drop in the late game. So, pretty scary. Because the card plays well early, and it can also play well late, for Ulthrak, I think this is around a 2.5. You might not value it over your mana accelerators. You really want to be able to get to 6 mana in Ulthrak. So there could be builds of the deck where she doesn't always make the cut, but she's got a good payoff for your 6 drops. So we'll go 2.5 on the Ulthrak, and for everyone else, aggro's not as good in this format, and other people won't have as many 6 drops. She's still fine as a 2-drop, but I think for other people she'd just be a 2. Warped Dragon. This is a red and 5 colorless. We have a 6/4 Dragon Horror. It's a rare. It has flying, menace, and ward of pay 4 life. It's a hefty chunk of life. At the beginning of your upkeep, target opponent banishes 2, exiles the top 2, and you create a treasure token. You may play those cards until end of turn. Now, it's worth noting that you can't use mana as if it were mana of any color. That's kind of where the treasure token comes in. You need to have mana fixing, or you need to hit their land drops from their deck. You can use the treasure token to help cast their spells. But, yeah, there's a chance you might not be able to use some of their spells right away if they cost a lot of colored pips that aren't in your deck. But this is a heck of a game-ending threat. It's packaged with card advantage, and it's something they have to pay for life in order to target. This is a heck of a card. It's especially good in Ulthrak because it's a 6-drop. But I would say any red deck would be happy to have this at the top end. So let's just give this a rating of a good flat 4. This is something that's going to pull you into red, something you might be willing to splash red just to get access to. And we have Warping Lightning. This is 2 red, 4 colorless, and is a common sorcery. Warping Lightning deals 6 damage to target creature or planeswalker, then breach. So you get to kill what's probably their best thing, and then you get either a free land or spell. This is strong. Much like the black card we looked at that kills a thing and gets something back from your graveyard, this is kind of similar value here. It's more random, but it could get you a mana advantage by casting a giant spell for free with the Breach. So I think even though this is a 6-mana sorcery, you're happy to play this. It's a little bit hard to splash with the double red. All of that being in consideration, I think this is a 3.5. I think this is a very strong spell. It's got card advantage, and kind of cures what ails you, keeps pushing you further into the game. And that's it for red. So hope you all are still enjoying this journey with me. Stay tuned next time for green, and then we'll be looking at multicolor, and then on to colorless, artifacts, and lands. And colorless is a faction unto itself in this case that uses the colorless mana symbol. So it'll be an interesting time. Stay tuned. Until then, like, subscribe, check out all my other videos, and never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.